you can get this information. Next slide. So this is the tape, as a pole. Next slide. But the other configuration is when this becomes like a bus stop. So it's still the tape. Here it's the same thing, the tape that becomes like an arch. And then you have the glass side on the front. Next slide. So it's more really like an iPhone that you play with. So you got this digital strip. That's the one where you got the numbers and the other information, and then you touch it. And then you got the continuation. That's the shelter for the bus stop, the shelter. And this is something we're working on. It will be presented in October, the first built prototype. Next slide. Okay, so this is a project that's getting, so far were projects starting at MIT, in the end MIT and Torino. Now this is a project that started in Torino with MIT, so the emphasis is moving to the architecture side, the office side. And this is a company, next slide, that came to us asking if we could design something, a room that would make you always feel at home. Imagine you travel a lot, every night you're in a different hotel room. How can you have a room that makes you feel at home in every place? Next slide. So the question is, what if your room, anywhere in the world, could always fit you like the gloves on your hands? But, next slide. What if you have 5 pairs of gloves? You always need to switch. How can you do that? So the video is showing our idea for the room. Something that, like those things that capture your geometry, that are flexible changes. So the video. How can we do this in a physical space? Next slide. In most of the video, there's some music, but we didn't connect the sound. But imagine there's some music. This is actually with Royce Kopf as a background. So you go home, you can have a bed for 2 people or for 3 people. You just decide night by night. Can give you a massage. Can take different type of configurations. The most difficult one is the following one, because you need to make it actually waterproof. Not that the champagne, 1 pin is for the champagne. And so this is actually, it's still a project we're working on. It's like a concept that we actually want to do part of it. Perhaps it's a piece of furniture, perhaps it's a full room, but how we can actually play with it, with the reconfigurable thing. Next. Another project, this started in the office as well, but then we did it with MIT. So it's a project was selected at Venice Biennale as well. Next slide. There's a new projector by IBM that allows you to project everywhere where you want around yourself, 360 degrees. And the question is, if you have that, what type of architecture can you actually have? How can you use it to create a new type of space where every surface can become a projection surface, where every place can become a screen? And so next slide. This is the projector. It's like, when you got clubs and you got lights with mirrors that rotate, with rotating mirrors, the same concept applied to a projector. So you put one in here, and from there you can project wherever you want all around yourself. And so next slide. Our idea was the space shouldn't be like a formal exercise. The space should just be a way to respond to that technology. So the way that the space is built is maximizing the co-visibility of surfaces. Can you see the next slide? So it becomes like this. Here there's no projection, but from one single point you can actually project everywhere you want at 360 degrees. Next slide. You can also use it as a normal space. Very, very cheap. Everything, just 2 materials, white, plaster, and industrial wood is what you see here. It's a wood that's very, very inexpensive because it's done with little pieces that are left over from working with wood. So it's very cheap restoration, but it allows you to then become animated with the projector and with every surface becoming like a screen. Next slide. And I'll stop with this project, and then we can have a bit of discussion, because I think because of the match. I have many other projects, but I'd like to stop with this. It's something we did in Milan in 2008, last year, for one of the main fashion houses called Trussardi. Next slide. So what happens is that there's two main plazas in Milan. One is called Piazza della Scala. It's where the Scala Theatre is. And then one is next to it. It's very small. It's called Filodrammatici. And at the moment, this fashion house, Trussardi, has a big palace in the middle. That's their headquarters. And you see it in the next slide. So their headquarters at the moment is what you see on the left. It was done by a quite famous Italian architect of the 80s, Gregotti. And Gregotti designed it as three different pieces. You got on the top the gray, a shop. Then in the middle, you got like an internal plaza, a space like an open room inside. Here to the left, just in front of it, you got the Scala Theatre, the one that was just redone by Mario Botta. And then down there, you have a bar, cafe. So our idea was, and you got the plaza, Piazza della Scala at the top, and the other one over here. So our idea, how can we actually connect the two plazas, make them, and add to that the feeling of like a catwalk, like a fashion catwalk, when you walk up and down, that connects the two plazas. Actually, let's go back to the previous slide. So this was our initial concept. So we do this, and we go from the entrance all the way through the palace, and then we end up in the smaller courtyard, in a smaller plaza, where we to build an extension to the palace, a little extension that it's at the end and connects the two plazas. Next slide. So next. So this is the project we did, and in this case, our idea was, can we actually do like an interactive cloud made of green, made of plants? And we did this with Patrick Blanc. He's the person who did with Jean Nouvel, the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris, that you might know, all covered with plants, the inventor of the vertical garden. So the idea was, how can we use this to create a cloud of green on the top that is like an interactive cloud and filters the light that goes down into a crystal box, which is what you see there. There's a crystal box that you have underneath. And again, our idea was, can we design an architecture that changes with time and space, that by the time of the day and so on changes the light, it goes down. Next slide. That was at the beginning. Actually, now it's grown a lot. This was in the middle, growing quite a bit. Now it's like a big forest on the top. There was a little problem, though, because a few months ago, the people who cleaned the glass, actually, the way this works is with a system of water, hydroponic, like the way today we use it to grow tomatoes and so on, that collects the water and gives the water back to the plants. There's a circuit that gives water and nutrients to the plant. So what happened is that the people who were washing the glass actually dropped a bottle of the product into the circuit, and so all of that went to all the plants died. But apart from that, it's now this big green cloud of plants. And the idea is, again, if we go to the next slide, conclusions. If you remember this diagram, the question is, how can you put together the digital and the physical? And the way you do it is by putting the bits really in the materials we love, in the green space, in the water. That's what we as humans have been dealing with for thousands of years. This is what we want. It's not about virtual world. It's not about the architecture of the 90s. It's not about the shapes of Zaha Hadid. They're interesting shapes. I love Zaha, and she's great, but it's not about that. The digital is really how can you put together the interactive nature of things, of the digital, with the physical nature of bits. How can we merge bits and atoms? And this is really the challenge that we have in the next 5 to 10 years to solve. It's a very similar condition to what Corbusier was saying in 1923 when he wrote Towards a New Architecture. And then in that book, he states, today's machine civilization is looking for and needs to find its architectural expression. And he was the person who actually helped that. Now, all of us today have a different task. And the task is how today we can give shape to the digital civilization. The way our life has been so much changed in the past 15 years is now going to change cities and buildings. And finding the way this is going to happen is the challenge that you have to solve, we have to solve in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's what we say, new type of design, where really to put together the technology, but of course, the people in the space. And the next slide. is the fact that I'm having a lot of fun going around and presenting this and being here with you tonight. But actually, some of the people who did the hard work, both in Boston and Torino, some of them are listed here from Boston. So they're the people who should be thanked because all of this work is actually what they've been spending days and nights working on. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Vlatko, I think we have like 15 minutes before in the match, we get close to the match, and for questions and discussion and.
Thank you for coming here. I would like to know, what do you think, how can poor country, because 80% of the town in the world are very poor, you mentioned great towns, great cities, but can you tell me how can a small town like Skopje or many other towns in Macedonia use this technology, digital technology, because we are way back?
Well, thanks for the question. I think thanks for the question. I think it's a very good point. But some of the technologies we need to think about. One of the technologies that allows us think about the ROM project that is done through cell phone, and I'm sure that everybody here has a cell phone. Who doesn't have a cell phone in this room? Right. So you see that there's a lot of things we can do when we think creatively about technology. I'll show you another example. That we have done in probably the most poor country on earth. One of the most poor. It's in Sri Lanka. A number of houses. I didn't include them here. It was a project for the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama has a Buddhist foundation that helped rebuild Sri Lanka following the tsunami. 2005, 2004, end of December, the tsunami destroyed a lot of Sri Lanka. And of the coast, and then a lot of reconstruction. So let me show you, for instance, I'll show you some slides of that. The point is that I think it's a matter of thinking creatively, and having the same philosophy can actually, you can find a way to address the problems. The idea is how can you create a space that's more responsive, and in every condition you will have a different type of answer. But I think there's always an answer. If you're creative enough, it's actually much more interesting because if you need to be more creative and you will find an answer. That's my suggestion. I'll show you the couple of slides on the project we did in Sri Lanka. Maybe. So actually, this is the website from Italy, and so it's just public information. And so if you look at here, the project in Sri Lanka is here. And so in that case, so we got in Sri Lanka, really very, very poor country, nothing compared to any. Really, compared to Europe, everywhere in Europe, we are very rich compared to, and they have a tsunami, so that means that a lot of people died on the coast. And the most terrible thing is that the government, actually at that time, decided that they didn't want to build anymore on the coast. They wanted to relocate all the people from the coast to the inside. And that was a tragedy. Everybody thought it was a big tragedy, all organizations, because people who lived for thousands of years on the coast to be moved miles away inside. And the idea was, the government probably was going to do this and perhaps then to allow more tourist development on the coast. So with the Dalai Lama Foundation, we jumped in and we said, well, what could we do to actually allow people to still stay on the coast? Well, if you want to do that, you need to have two things. The first thing you need to do is actually make sure that people are safe if there's another tsunami. And today you can do it thanks again to cell phone. You can actually have a network. Even in Sri Lanka, everybody has a cell phone. So if you create an early warning system that sends you, based on your location, tells you what you should do in the case of a tsunami, there's very simple technology. You can do it, and you make the people safe. So if you make the people safe, you're already 90% okay with that. You're 90% you solve the problem. Now, the second side is how do you make the home safe? And here is what the second part of the project we did was, look at the traditional house in Sri Lanka. People built and also were building after the tsunami is what you see on the top left. And then you got a certain amount of cubic meters. You see the little white dots. That is placed, all the material on the outside of the building. Now, if there's a big wave, there's a tsunami, what happens is what you see there. Actually, we went to Sri Lanka following the tsunami, and what you see is that all the houses you see here, all the walls parallel to the coast collapse, and all the walls perpendicular stayed. So if you have a building like this, and here is the sea, and the big wave comes, you understand easily this thing will collapse and the other things will stay. So the idea was, how can we learn from that and do a house that actually is basically made with these cores, like you see in the second, from the top, on the second line. You have all these 4 elements that are perpendicular to the coast, so they're very strong when there's a wave. And then the water can go through the house, it doesn't matter. There's no way you can keep your house not wet. If there's 5 meters of water, your house will be wet. But what you don't want to do is that the roof goes apart. So what you want to have is that when you go back, you're safe because of the cell phone early warning, and you go back and your house is still there. And that's what you see there. It's a big wave and the house will still be there. So that's the concept. We added a few other things. We developed a new material with concrete blocks, the way they build today, but we added in the concrete blocks a little bit of rebar, so they become like something that they're not doing at the moment. It makes it much stronger. In the next slide, actually, to do next, you need to click on next, Slavo, on the yellow, yeah. No, next. And this is the first prototype we did. So actually, the other thing we did was go and look at a very good architect. If you got any chance to look him up online, somebody who died a couple of years ago, called Jeffrey Bauer. A very interesting architect who studied in London,